Welcome back, beautiful souls, to our discussion of the Arthurian tarots, particularly Anna Marie Ferguson's version of the legend, the Arthurian tarot that inspired this series. And I want to thank you all for your contributions to the previous discussion of the magician. And I want to continue to be open to these discussions, and that is, how can we learn through myth and deepen our understandings of the archetypes of the tarot, particularly in the major arcana, which are deep and wide and very twisty stories. And I want to remain open to these conversations, to possibly seeing something in an archetype that I may not have seen before. And for each of the cards in the guidebook for Claire Duval's Tarot Arthurien, there is an affirmation, a sacred contract, if you will. And for the magician, it reads, I utilize my personal magic with intelligence. And that just reminds me of how responsible, or how much responsibility there is, that comes with an awareness of the other world, of the use of qualities of the elements that may not be readily available to everyone who works just within the third dimension. And it reminds me of a phrase that was brought back into familiarity, I think, in the Spider-Man movies, and that was, with great power comes great responsibility. And that is something that I think is a theme that certainly Arthur awakens to throughout his reign, that he has tremendous access to people, to beings that are able to manipulate the world as we know it. And what is his responsibility as king, as leader, in having access to all of that? And then, of course, in extension, what are each of us going to do with that power as we begin to explore its uses and deepen our awareness of connection with it, be it through clairvoyancy, through magic practices, any number of ways that we may connect with this. And so today we turn to the High Priestess. And in Legend, the Arthurian Tarot, we're looking at a beautiful painting of Nimue. The priestess Nimue and her company congregate in a sacred grove. She is one of the priestesses of Avalon, envoys of the goddess and bearers of ancient wisdom. In the woods, Nimue is surrounded by the spirits of nature. Unlike the empress, who is crowned by the people, here the priestess is crowned by the fae. Intensely curious, they cannot help but touch her, drape themselves about her, and play in her hair. After all, although she is sensitive to them, she is not of them. This represents her active relationship with the unseen and higher planes. Magnetic and mysterious, a skilled healer and advisor, she is also respected in the world of people. The priestess walks in both worlds. Nimue is wrapped in an iridescent cloak of light, representing her enlightened state of being. The surroundings and her dress are predominantly dark blue and purple, the colors of mystic knowledge. The book, which traditionally lies in the lap of the priestess, has been replaced here by the flame, which hovers between her hands, symbolic of her receptivity. Though she is educated in the old ways of the old gods, hers is an art which cannot strictly be learned through labor. She is, by her very nature, a conductor of this energy. This is an inherent ability which raises her to the office of priestess. And I think this is a really good observation and question to observe, to know, and to understand between the archetype of magician and high priestess. And I have thought about this also in terms of the high priest and the relationship between the high priestess and the high priest. And I think that the magician and the priest have more in common, and not with their masculinity, but with their connection to this world. And I'll talk more about that when I get to the priest. The high priestess comes through this almost as a birthright, who likely is born into a sacred circle of women who work with this gift, who know this gift. And maybe there are men as well too that could fit into this category, but there's a mystery and a magic that moves in a way that goes beyond practice. And what I mean by that is that in the archetype of the magician, and I believe I probably mentioned this in regards to the archetype, that there can be a sense of rookie. And I use that word because of its familiarity in sports. That one may be very gifted from an early age and show tremendous talent, but there is still a great deal of practice that is required. I think about the relationship between Gaius and Merlin in the television series Merlin, and how Merlin in that series, while he showed signs and gifts of having some extraordinary talent, could never have become the support for Arthur that he did had he not had the mentorship and the practices that Gaius placed upon him. That is not to say that the high priestess doesn't learn from, as a young girl, learn from the other women in her coven, in her circle, in her body of people. But it comes from, or it seems to come from, a place of complete mystery. This makes me think of the Red Seeds decks. It makes me think of, I don't know, just real magic and mystery that comes from an otherworldly place. And maybe that is also a deep connection with other elementals and other beings as well too. In the Matthews guidebook, they remind us that other worldly women guide and instruct Arthur and his court throughout all of the Arthurian legends. And during the Middle Ages, these many aspects of the goddess splintered into numerous maidens, wronged ladies, and widows. And if we return to the earlier texts, we find that rather than a bevy of damsels who needed knightly assistance, certain powerful women of great stature appear at crucial times to aid and assist the knights. The Lady of the Lake stems from a circuitous lineage of such women, chief of whom is Morgan, described as the daughter of the King of Avalon, or the sister of Arthur, or as a queen of a ninefold sisterhood in her own right. It is she who tends Arthur's wounds after the Battle of Camlan and in otherworldly time until he is called again. So there is this great connection between the other world and the ability of this mythical king to indeed rule with some success. Nimue is one of several women to hold the title Chief Damsel of the Lake. This can lead to some confusion, as the name Lady of the Lake may refer to, among others, Morgan, or the water spirit who fosters Lancelot and rises from the waters to give and later receive Excalibur. Nimue is often remembered as Merlin's undoing. The sage first happened upon her while she was dancing in the woods. As he watched her graceful movements, he felt his heart twist and recognized the danger, but was powerless to stop the emotion that overcame him and clouded his mind. From that day on, Merlin followed her everywhere. Though he was always at her heels, Nimue dared not rebuke the great Merlin for fear of his wrath and magical powers. The indignant court marveled at the sight of their wisest counselor acting the fool, and the gossip began. Arthur was thus relieved when Merlin announced that they would be leaving the court to travel through Brittany and Cornwall. Nimue had agreed to accompany Merlin on the condition that he promised not to use his powers to overcome her. Nimue, meanwhile, had promised herself that she would learn all she could of Merlin's magic arts so that one day she might be rid of him. Merlin's obsession deepened with time, and his relentless advances took a sinister turn. Nimue had waited as long as she dared. Aided by the enchantment he had taught her, Nimue trapped Merlin in a cave where he would remain for all eternity. Some say he languishes in a tower of air or under a great stone. Others believe he was not trapped at all, but merely chose to retire to the Isle of the Other World. In this interpretation of their relationship, Nimue was a trusted escort and nurse, a companion to help him on his journey to the Twilight Realm. Whether Merlin had simply withdrawn, become dangerous, or gone mad, a common fate of his kind, it seems whatever action Nimue had taken was considered justified, as there were no serious repercussions beyond gossip when she returned to the court. Nimue became an important advisor and friend to the king, saving his life and guarding him from the treachery of his sister. Nimue was also a great source of comfort to the knight Pellis when the lady he had been courting slept with Gawain. The Lady Ettarde had not taken the affections of Pellis seriously, as she had led him to believe. Rather, she thought herself capable of securing a husband of higher standing. Nimue cast a spell on Ettarde, which induced her to love Pellis. By this time, however, it was too late. Pellis had not only recovered from his despair, but also had come to trust and love Nimue. In time, Pellis and the honored damsel of the lake were married. And so you can see among these decks, among the stories and legends, that there is definitely a blurring of legend, a blurring of myth. But the energy here is one that reminds me of the Philarkos Tarot, actually, that the energy that I really feel in that deck, the power of the dream caves, the oracles, the power of mystery to beguile and to enchant. And while it appears in this story that Nimue was guided by Merlin, taught by Merlin, it feels to me as if he perhaps was in her power, under her spell the entire time. And there's, I'm not sure, quite a mysterious connection among these two. Either way, it feels as if this is yet another tale of great caution and yet tremendous guidance And yet, there is something very powerful to be gained in our own personal connection with the mysteries. The High Priestess in Tarot Arthurien is another image of Lady of the Lake. And in this case, she is inviting us into the water, inviting us into the mystery of the moon, the mystery of the goddess, asking us if we are ready to be immersed in, learn through and from that particular element and that ability to connect with the Fae and all that isn't seen. And so in the deck in the center and on the right, we see more of a typical high priestess that perhaps guards or protects sacred ground. Whereas in the other deck, the invitation appears a little open and perhaps in that regard a lot more dangerous. And if I were to summarize the nuance between magician and high priestess, I would say that the high priestess is more of a way of being rather than a way of doing. And I think that Claire Duval captures that very well in her paintings here, featuring the energy of Morgana as the magician, the one who is creating the potion, the medicine, whereas the Lady of the Lake, Vivian, I believe she is named in this deck, is one that is enticing us into the other world. So, two questions for you. One is there anything lost in the card without having a gateway or some sacred ground that is protected by the High Priestess? And the other question is, how would you describe the subtle nuance between the magic and the mystery of the magician versus that of the qualities of the high priestess? Thank you for being a part of this series. Namaste.